For this episode, I thought it might be fun to do a retrospective of my time spent playing video games. I have picked 10 significant games with a few honorable mentions at each juncture. So, let's start at the beginning. Although I'm sure I probably saw and maybe even played games like Space Invaders and Pac-Man on coffee table and upright machines in pubs when I was a little kid. My first notable experience was when I had a Commodore 16 for Christmas in 1985. It came with a game called Punchy, published by Commodore. In the game you take control of Bobby the policeman in a Punch and Judy inspired landscape. The goal is to traverse 15 screens from left to right. There are pits to be jumped over with pixel-perfect precision, flying tomatoes and custard pies, magic carpets to be ridden and of course Mr. Punch himself. It was quite difficult, but I played it for hours. Later I would also have games like Airwolf, Mr. Puniverse and Monkey Magic for the system too. My next computer would be the Commodore 64. With improved graphics and memory. It felt like a big step up. The starter pack I had also came with a cartridge game, RoboCop 2. This would mean I had at least one game that wouldn't take an eternity to load with the ever-looming possibility that it might not load properly and stitch me up. RoboCop 2 was developed and published by Ocean Software in 1990. The Detroit cyborg cop must stop a drug distributor, Kane, from spreading a new drug known as Nuke. It is mostly a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, with some levels viewed from behind RoboCop and providing a targeting reticle with which to kill generic criminals. It was obviously based on the not-so-good movie. It was not a great game either. It seemed to have been given mixed reviews, but I remember it being hard and frustrating. As a gamer, honing perseverance isn't a bad thing of course, and I certainly did that on this game. Petrol stations at this time would stock games, and it meant I was lucky enough to have lots of titles for this system. The Dizzy games were all great, and I loved International Karate as well. Around the same time arcade games were taking massive leaps forward too. On a family holiday I walked into an amusement arcade and saw Space Harrier. Its incredible sitting cabinet, graphics, and sound had me mesmerized. The excitement of playing it for the first time was palpable. Space Harrier is a third-person arcade rail shooter game developed by Sega. It was originally conceived as a realistic military-themed game played in a third-person perspective, and featuring a player-controlled fighter jet, but technical and memory restrictions resulted in Sega developer Yu Suzuki redesigning it around a jet-propelled human character in a fantasy setting. The arcade game is controlled by an analog flight stick, while the deluxe arcade cabinet is a cockpit-style hydraulic motion simulator cabinet that tilts and rolls during play, for which it is referred to as a Taikana or body sensation arcade game in Japan. From then on arcade machines seemed to pop up in every chip shop, ice rink and cinema. I would ask to play every machine I saw. I particularly liked Double Dragon and Splatter House. The Commodore Amiga would be my next computer, but I would have to wait before I got one. In the meantime, I had friends who had one, or other systems like the ZX Spectrum, NES, Atari ST, or Master System. So I also had the chance to play popular titles on those machines at their houses. When I finally got one, I knew home computers were slowly starting to close the gap with arcade games. One of my favorite games was Turrican 2. It is a run-and-gun game developed by Factor 5 and published by Rainbow Arts in 1991. It can be described as a cross between Metroid and Psychonix Oscar. While the huge detailed labyrinth levels and the morph ball function were inspired by Metroid, the overall graphics design and weapons were inspired by Psychonix Oscar. The game is divided into 5 distinct worlds, split across 11 levels, each with its own themed music provided by Chris Hulsbeck. The first games I saw for the Amiga were Magic Pockets, which featured on the Saturday morning kids show Get Fresh, and Gremlins 2, which my friend had. He was first to have an Amiga. Now come the big shifts. The town I grew up in from the age of 11 had several arcades as it was situated next to a river and attracted tourists. This meant I had access to every new arcade title that was released. The early 90s was a fantastic time for game development, but the game that drained my pocket money the most was Final Fight. Final Fight is a side-scrolling beat-em-up made by Capcom. Set in the fictional Metro City, the game lets the player control one of 3 street fighters, former pro wrestler and city mayor Mike Hager, expert brawler Cody Travers, and modern-day ninja Guy. The trio set out to rescue Jessica, Hager's daughter and Cody's girlfriend, when she is kidnapped by the Mad Gear Gang. I still play this game ritualistically with my close friend, and it is just as brilliant as when I played with my brother at age 12. Other great arcade games I played avidly at the time were WrestleFest and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The next arcade title I am going to speak about was a high watermark that has never been matched by any other game for me. Street Fighter 2 was the culmination of everything I was into at age 13. At that age I loved WWF wrestling, old kung fu and martial arts movies, heavy metal, Games Workshop, and arcade games. This game smashed everything together. Street Fighter 2, The World Warrior is a one-on-one fighting game developed by Capcom and originally released for arcades in 1991. Street Fighter 2 follows several conventions and rules established by its 1987 predecessor Street Fighter. The player engages opponents in one-on-one close-quarter combat in a series of best 2 out of 3 matches. The objective of each round is to deplete the opponent's vitality before the timer runs out. However, the massive colorful sprites, 6 attack buttons and choice of 8 playable characters was revolutionary. This game helped to save the flagging arcade industry and opened the door for many great fighting games. It was a time of innovation. Other remarkable games of the time included Time Traveler, a game that is best known for its arcade cabinet which displays a holographic light projection, produced using optical technology from Dentsu, and Pit Fighter, which was one of the first games to use digitized live actors. Back at home I finally decided to move from home computers to a console. I chose the Super Nintendo. Mainly because Street Fighter 2 was being ported to the system. There was a game that I played for hours that wasn't Street Fighter though. Super Mario World, known in Japan as Super Mario World, Super Mario Bros. 4, needs little introduction. It is a platform video game developed and published by Nintendo. It was released in Japan in 1990, North America in 1991, and Europe and Australia in 1992. The player controls Mario on his quest to save Princess Peach and Dinosaur Land from the series' antagonist Bowser and the Koopalings. The gameplay is similar to that of earlier Super Mario games. Players control Mario through a series of levels in which the goal is to reach the goalpost at the end. But it introduces new elements. As well as dashing and jumping, the player can also fly or float with the aid of the Cape Feather and P-Balloon and can execute the new spin jump move. The game has 96 levels all accessed from an overworld map. I loved this console and had many games for it. I particularly liked Rock and Roll Racing and The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. At around this time I started learning to play the guitar. This meant video games became a more casual pursuit. I did go on to have a PlayStation. I had a great time with games like Soul Blade and Tekken amongst others, but my focus had slightly shifted. My next big moment came when my brother and I started playing and then went on to complete House of the Dead 2. We played the game at several cinema arcades and motorway service stations. The House of the Dead 2 is a horror-themed light gun shooter arcade game and the second game in the House of the Dead series of video games. It was developed by Sega for arcades on the Sega Naomi board in November 1998. It includes an auto-reload feature that allows players to point their guns off-screen to reload their weapons without pulling the trigger. Players must shoot their way through hordes of zombies and other monsters while attempting to rescue civilians being attacked. The game's story picks up slightly over a year after the original game, and follows several AMS agents investigating a zombie outbreak in Italy. The protagonists are tasked with finding the source of the attack whilst also locating a missing agent, known as G. For the next decade or so, I would stay in touch with video games. I did buy a PlayStation 2 and then 3, but I mainly played new iterations of Street Fighter and sequels of Tekken and Soul Calibur. I also played any arcade games I came across, but they became fewer and further between. Then, after a long period, the dark time lifted when a close friend introduced me to video game emulators. This meant I could replay all of my childhood favorites and investigate arcade games I never had the chance to play. During hours of digging online and various wormhole dives, I came across this fan-made game which uses the beats of Rage Engine. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe is a picture-perfect side-scrolling beat-em-up. It gives you the chance to play one of many characters from the 80s cartoon. It's shockingly good and so much fun. I can't recommend it enough. Finally, I want to finish off this list with a couple of games I am playing with my two sons. Cuphead is a video game developed and published by Studio MDHR. The game follows Cuphead, a small, anthropomorphic cup who, in a deal with the devil after losing a game at the devil's casino, is sent on a quest to repossess the souls of runaway debtors as payment for Cuphead's loss. Cuphead's gameplay is centered on continual boss fights, interspersed with run and gun levels. In the game, up to 2 players control Cuphead and or his brother Mugman to fight through several levels and boss fights. As the game progresses, the protagonist acquires more power and abilities, eventually threatening the devil himself. My last honorable mention goes to Undertale. Undertale is a 2015 2D role-playing video game created by American indie developer Toby Fox. The player controls a child who has fallen into the underground, a large, secluded region under the surface of the earth, separated by a magical barrier. The player meets various monsters during the journey back to the surface, although some monsters might engage the player in a fight. The combat system involves the player navigating through mini-bullet hell attacks by the opponent. They can opt to pacify or subdue monsters in order to spare them instead of killing them. These choices affect the game, with the dialogue, characters, and story changing based on outcomes. The concept or pacifism and as a means to success is progressive and fascinating. It proves that there is still plenty of room for innovation in game genres. In conclusion, I know that so many mind-blowing games are missing from this list. Tomb Raider, Resident Evil, Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, The Last of Us and many more. I have come to terms with where I'm at as a retro gamer, but I will always try to stay open-minded. Next episode I will be back to reviewing crazy lesser-known titles, but thank you so much for watching this retrospective. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you want to tell me about your own video game journey. Until next time, take care.